The wind carried a faint whisper of the storm long before the first raindrop hit the ground. The sky, once bright, had grown heavy with dark clouds rolling in from the horizon. The air was thick with the damp, earthy scent of impending rain, a signal that time was running out. Setting foot into the clearing, I glanced around, evaluating the spot. It was surrounded by tall pines, their branches swaying with the growing breeze, and the forest floor was a patchwork of damp leaves and soft moss. A perfect location, yet with an undeniable urgency to prepare before the downpour began. The 3-room inflatable tent lay neatly packed in its carry bag, a promise of quick setup and shelter. Pulling it out, I felt the weight of the task ahead. The wind was picking up, sharp and unpredictable, tugging at loose corners of the material as I unrolled it. The instructions were simple, almost deceivingly so. Anchor it down, inflate the main structure, and let the design do the rest. But as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, those steps seemed to stretch into a race against time. Grabbing the stakes, I hammered them into the soft ground with swift, deliberate movements. The rain quickly shifted from a light drizzle to a steady shower, each drop striking the tent material with a hollow patter. The inflatable frame required precision. The pump hissed and groaned as I worked, glancing nervously at the sky as the storm's intensity grew. Each gust of wind tested my grip on the tent fabric, threatening to turn it into a sail. The structure began to take shape, rising steadily despite the growing chaos around me. The sound of the pump was drowned out by the rain, now falling in sheets, soaking my jacket and dripping from the brim of my hood. My hands, chilled and damp, fumbled slightly as I secured the final anchor points. But finally, the tent stood tall, a sturdy, 3-room fortress in the midst of the storm. Stepping inside for the first time felt like entering a sanctuary. The rain hammered against the roof and walls, but the material held firm, creating a bubble of dry space. The first room served as an entryway, a buffer zone to keep wet gear from infiltrating the main living area. I carefully wiped my hands on a dry cloth and placed my soaked bag near the entrance, taking a moment to collect myself. The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling through the trees and sending occasional bursts of cold air through the cracks in the tent's entrance. I couldn't help but wonder if this temporary shelter would hold through the night. For now, though, I was grateful to be out of the rain, with a chance to catch my breath. Adjusting the interior layout, I focused on making the space functional and efficient. The middle room, spacious enough to serve as a living and dining area, quickly became a makeshift command center. I unrolled a compact mat on the floor and began arranging essentials: a lightweight cooking stove, a waterproof bag of dry food, and a small lantern. The back room, designed as the sleeping area, remained untouched for now, its warmth a promise for later. Outside, the storm showed no signs of relenting. The soundscape was a symphony of rain cascading off the tent's surface, wind whipping through the trees, and the occasional low rumble of thunder in the distance. Yet inside, it was surprisingly quiet, a testament to the tent's design. As I adjusted a vent to allow for better airflow, a small wave of condensation trickled down the fabric, a reminder of the challenges still ahead. I checked the time, realizing how quickly the afternoon had slipped away. The storm had turned the day into a dim, gray blur, and the temperature was steadily dropping. Looking out through the small window of the tent, I could barely see the outline of the forest, shrouded in mist and rain. It was as though the world beyond this fragile bubble of shelter had disappeared entirely, leaving only the storm and the quiet resolve to endure it. The thought lingered. This was just the beginning. The real test would come as the night crept in, bringing with it colder air and even stronger winds. For now, the tent was holding up, its walls steady and its seams tight. But the question loomed. Could it last through the night unscathed? With that thought, I set to work securing the interior, knowing every moment counted in this relentless weather. The rain intensified, its steady rhythm escalating to a relentless drumming against the tent. The wind, no longer a passing force, howled through the trees with an unrestrained fury, making the tent's walls shudder. Each gust seemed to test the structure's integrity, and I couldn't help but keep a cautious ear tuned to the storm's crescendo. Inside, though, the tent remained a dry haven, the boundaries between me and the chaos outside defined by the material that now felt more critical than ever. I moved through the 3 rooms, each serving its purpose under these extreme conditions. In the first room, I stored my soaked boots and rain jacket, keeping them separate to maintain the dryness of the living and sleeping areas. Water droplets clung to the edges of the entryway, but the seams held tight, preventing any significant leaks. The air was cool and damp, but manageable. I checked the ventilation flaps again, adjusting them slightly to allow airflow without compromising the tent's protection from the downpour. In the main living area, I lit a small camping stove, its soft orange glow a stark contrast to the gray gloom outside. The sound of the rain faded slightly under the hum of the burner as I prepared a quick meal. The smell of instant noodles mixed with the earthy scent of wet canvas, creating a strangely comforting atmosphere. Despite the storm, this small moment of warmth and normalcy felt grounding. As the meal simmered, I took a moment to listen, really listen. The storm was a symphony of chaos, yet there was a rhythm to it, a reminder of nature's raw power. The tent occasionally shifted as stronger gusts pushed against it, but the inflatable frame absorbed the pressure remarkably well. I ran my hand along one of the walls, checking for weak spots or signs of strain. A few spots felt cooler, where condensation was beginning to gather, but the material remained sturdy. It was reassuring, though my thoughts kept circling back to the unpredictable nature of the weather. What if the storm grew worse? What if the tent didn't hold? These questions lingered in the background, adding a quiet tension to the otherwise calm interior. As the wind howled louder, I retreated to the sleeping area to check my setup. The inflatable mattress was dry, and the sleeping bag had retained its warmth, shielded from the dampness that clung to everything outside. I laid down for a moment, listening to the rain hammering above. The storm had a way of making the world feel smaller, shrinking it down to just a space, this moment. The occasional flash of lightning illuminated the tent, casting brief, flickering shadows across the walls. The accompanying thunder rolled in waves, sometimes distant, sometimes startlingly close. Each time, I felt a pang of unease but quickly reminded myself of the tent's performance so far. It had weathered hours of rain and wind without faltering, a testament to its design and the preparation that had gone into this trip. Returning to the main room, I checked my gear. The lantern provided a steady light, cutting through the dimness, while my supplies remained organized and dry. I opened a small window flap to look outside. The view was surreal. Sheets of rain slanted through the air, the forest barely visible beyond the mist and darkness. The ground outside had turned to mud, pooling in uneven patches. The wind carried a low, almost mournful whistle as it passed through the trees. It was beautiful in its own way, though far from forgiving. Sitting on the mat, I sipped hot tea, letting the warmth spread through me. The storm wasn't letting up, but for now, I was safe. The tent had created a strange dichotomy. Chaos outside, calm inside. It was hard not to marvel at the contrast. At times, I found myself just sitting quietly, observing the interplay of light, sound, and movement, letting the storm remind me of nature's untamed beauty. There were moments when water droplets formed near the edges of the tent floor, a subtle warning that even the best preparations weren't foolproof. Using a small towel, I wiped them away, ensuring no moisture would seep into my living space. These minor tasks felt almost meditative, a way to stay grounded amidst the storm's intensity. Hours passed, and the storm continued to rage, its strength unwavering. The tent, however, remained a steadfast barrier. I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for its resilience, for the comfort it provided in the face of such harsh conditions. The storm's soundtrack, wind, rain, and distant thunder, was both a reminder of vulnerability and a reassurance of endurance. The night wasn't over yet, but the tent had proven itself capable so far, giving me a cautious sense of hope for the hours to come. Morning arrived quietly. The storm reduced to a gentle drizzle. The rain's relentless hammering had softened into a rhythmic patter, and the howling wind was now a faint whisper weaving through the trees. The air inside the tent felt cooler, but dry, proof that it had weathered the night successfully. Stretching out in the sleeping area, I listened to the faint chirping of birds that had returned with the first light. Nature was stirring again, cautiously emerging from the storm's grip. I stepped into the entryway, where my wet gear had been stashed the night before. The boots were still damp, but the rain jacket had dried enough to wear comfortably. Rolling up the sleeves, I pulled the zipper tight and prepared to face the aftermath of the storm. Outside, the world looked transformed. Every surface glistened with moisture, the leaves weighed down by droplets that sparkled in the faint sunlight breaking through the thinning clouds. Patches of fog clung to the forest floor, curling around the base of trees like smoke. The tent had held remarkably well. Walking its perimeter, I checked for signs of strain or water seepage. The seams were intact, the anchor points solid, and the inflatable frame showed no sagging despite the night's relentless winds. A few areas near the base had collected mud and debris, but otherwise, the tent stood as it had the day before, a testament to its robust design. Still, I took note of improvements that could be made for future trips, such as positioning the tent slightly higher to avoid pooling water around the edges. Returning inside, I began to pack up. The sleeping area was carefully dismantled first, with the sleeping bag rolled tightly and the inflatable mattress deflated with a quiet hiss. Every piece of gear was wiped down and repacked, ensuring nothing remained damp. The main living area, now empty of its contents, felt larger in the soft morning light filtering through the tent's fabric. It had been my sanctuary through the storm, a space that turned the chaos outside into a manageable experience. The final step was deflating the tent itself. Pulling out the stakes, I worked methodically, the fabric collapsing in slow waves as the air released from the frame. Even in its deflated state, the tent was impressive, a compact package that had offered 3 distinct rooms and reliable protection through the storm. I packed it into its bag, grateful for the simplicity and efficiency of its design. With the campsite cleared, I stood for a moment, taking in the forest around me. The storm had left its mark, branches scattered across the ground, deep puddles in low areas, and a freshness in the air that only follows heavy rain. The sun was beginning to break through in earnest now, casting beams of light that danced through the damp canopy above. It was a scene of renewal, the forest coming back to life after a night of upheaval. I reflected on the experience, the challenges of setting up in a downpour, the unease of the storm's power, and the satisfaction of seeing the tent endure it all. It was a reminder of why I sought out these moments, connecting with nature, learning to adapt, and finding a sense of calm in the face of unpredictability. The 3-room inflatable tent had been more than just shelter. It had been a key player in the story, proving its worth through design and durability. Walking away from the clearing, I followed the muddy trail back toward the forest's edge. Each step was accompanied by the sound of wet ground underfoot, a steady rhythm that matched the lingering drizzle. The birds had grown bolder, their calls louder and more varied, filling the air with a lively melody. The storm was now just a memory, its presence reduced to glistening leaves and the occasional distant rumble of retreating thunder. I paused at the edge of the forest for one last look back. The campsite was invisible now, swallowed by the trees, but the experience lingered vividly in my mind. The storm had tested my preparedness, my gear, and my resolve, but it had also offered a rare glimpse into nature's raw beauty. It was a humbling reminder of how small we are in the grand scheme of things, and how much we depend on the tools and knowledge we bring with us into the wild. As the trail opened into a wider path, the sun broke through the clouds fully, casting a warm glow over the landscape. The rain had stopped, and the forest seemed to breathe easier, its vibrant greens more vivid than before. The journey back felt lighter, a fitting contrast to the weight of the storm that had defined the previous day. This wasn't just another camping trip. It was a story of resilience, adaptation, and connection with the untamed. And as I left the forest behind, I carried with me not just the lessons learned, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even in the face of nature's unpredictability, there is always a way to endure and appreciate its beauty.